Now we're going to start discussing some of the key practices within evidence-based management. So one of the things we're trying to accomplish with evidence-based management is to examine and understand how variables relate to each other, especially cause and effect relationships. So for example, you can replace factor A with basically any variable and factor B with any variable. So first example here, how do monetary rewards, factor A, impact employee performance, factor B? Maybe we have a hypothesis that if we create monetary incentives, maybe a bonus or commission, that's going to increase employee motivation and thereby performance. As another example, we might ask, how does diversity within an organization or team impact team creativity? Maybe we hypothesize that because more diverse teams have a broader range of background and experiences, that might lead to more creative results. Now, one thing that we have to be careful about when we are examining relationships between variables is that often the information that we have is correlational in nature, and that means we cannot necessarily assume that the variables are causally related. Now, hopefully this sounds somewhat familiar. Going back to some of your stat classes, you've probably had some professor try to pound into your brain that correlation does not equal causation. And so that's what we're talking about here. Let's look at this example. So studies have shown that kids who watch violent TV and play violent video games are more likely to exhibit violent behaviors. So the question is, does that mean that violent programming causes violence? So a lot of times people will make the argument that there's a direct causal relationship there. But it could also be the case that more violently inclined children, per se, are more attracted to violent TV and video games. So, you know, the point here is asking yourself what kind of evidence it would take to make you convinced that it is in fact, you know, the video games themselves that are causing violence versus the other way around, or it could be a third intervening variable, such as in this next example. So here's another example that's often used. There's a well-cited correlation between ice cream consumption within an area and number of deaths by drowning. Now the question is, does this mean that eating ice cream is somehow causing these drowning deaths? Is that old wives' tale true that, you know, you shouldn't eat before you swim? It could lead to drowning. The other option would be, is it the case that for some reason an increase in drowning deaths leads people to eat more ice cream? Logically, if you just reason through this example, you can probably figure out that neither one of those explanations makes a lot of strong theoretical sense. What's really going on is that there's a third intervening variable, which is that both higher ice cream consumption and higher drowning deaths are likely to coincide with hotter temperatures and summer vacation. So the relationship between ice cream consumption and drowning deaths is merely a result of their both being related to the hot temperatures and summer vacation. Another key practice is isolating variations that affect desired outcomes. So complicating, you know, our examination of the relationship between factor A and B, a lot of times in management, the answer is that the relationship between factor A and factor B depends on some other contextual variable. So for example, perhaps we assume that in general there is a negative relationship between job satisfaction and turnover. So the more satisfied people are, the lower their turnover. However, if you place the contextual variable of the general economy overlapping that, you could see something different. So let's talk about a time where the job market is really tight. People are not able to find jobs easily. And in that case, even if they're not satisfied, it might not impact their turnover because they don't have any other job options. So we often want to look at contextual variables. A third practice is reducing the overuse, underuse, and misuse of specific practices. So all this means is if we don't have evidence that a certain practice is a valid practice, then we should question whether it should be used. An example here is that in some countries, it is relatively common that employers will use handwriting analysis or graphology as a predictor or an employee selection method. And this is in spite of the fact that the data on this does not support this practice at all. So handwriting, the way your handwriting looks, is not a valid predictor of managerial performance, so therefore it should not be utilized to select managers. Number 4, the idea is to create a culture in your organization, and also in the context of this class, of using evidence-based decision-making and research participation. So it's creating a culture where everyone expects that decisions will be made on evidence and logic, and it's okay to question where evidence came from or why a certain decision was made, and that people don't take that sensitively or personally, that it's just part of the culture of the way decisions are made.